He was born into a world of magic without any magical skills, but decides to become the strongest magician after killing every monster in the dungeon with his sword. Will is a young boy living in a world where magic is valued above all else, but unfortunately for him, he was born without any magical talent. Despite this, he manages to enroll in one of the most prestigious academies. The problem is, how can someone without any magical talent succeed at such a university? Will decides to tackle this problem by honing his skills with the sword. He heads off to high-level dungeons regularly, fighting against giant beasts that shoot magic spells at him. Using his incredible speed and prowess with his sword, he dodges their attacks, stylishly slices the monsters in half with a single slash, and continues to face even more monsters to survive and escape the dungeon. The next morning, Will goes to the classroom extremely tired. Professor Edward is teaching about the basics of alchemy and how to produce sulfur, which helps in the creation of explosives. Edward notices Will dozing off in the back and calls his name, but Will keeps snoring until Edward shouts, startling him awake. Edward calls Will to the front to demonstrate the process they were discussing. Without any other choice, Will is forced to go in front of the entire class. Edward tells him that it's super easy. All he has to do is produce some flames, and sulfur will be created. Will shakily takes out the wand from his bag and chants the spell to bring forth flames, but to his dismay, not even a small spark emerges from the wand. The students start laughing at him as if he were a stand-up comedian, but Edward tells them to shut up. Edward looks at Will with disgust and claims that he has no idea how someone like Will can be so good at theory but utterly fail at practical magic, wondering how Will even got selected for this academy. Suddenly, a red-haired boy named Cyan takes out his wand and confidently points it towards the items on the desk, using his flame magic to burn them and create sulfur while Will cowers behind the flames. Edward tells them not to do anything without permission and creates a huge crystal of sulfur with his magic spell. He emphasizes that magic is the most important thing in this world, as mages are heroes, and to survive at this academy, students need to be good at magic. He asserts that fools who have no idea how to control magic should simply leave the academy. After class, Cyan and his cronies walk over to Will and embarrass him, saying that he can only kill low-level dungeon monsters. However, a classmate and childhood friend of Will's named Cole intervenes and tells Cyan to leave him alone, pointing out that Will is much nicer than Cyan and his group. Cyan gets a bit flustered but laughs it off, claiming that kindness and hard work won't get you very far without magic, before walking away with his goons. Cole tells Will not to worry too much, but Will seems used to the bullying. He looks toward the sky, commenting on its beauty. Years ago, humans were trapped under a layer of darkness and never saw the sky because they lived in fear of evil spirits who cast a shadow on the world. Thankfully, 5 legendary mages stood up to the evil spirits, and after a huge battle, pushed them back, freeing humans from the darkness and revealing the real sky. These mages were known as Mage Evanders, and that title now passes down to the most powerful mages in the world. Will remembers the promise he made to one of his childhood friends named Elfie, who used to show him storybooks of the Mage Evanders. They promised each other they would become Mage Evanders one day. Elfie, who had incredible talent, kept her end of the deal and quickly rose up the ranks to become the youngest Mage Evander in history, living in the Divine Tower. Will, on the other hand, turned out to be far below average, barely holding on to the dream and the promise. Later that day, Will meets with Professor Walk, who ends up screaming at him upon learning that Will went to level 7 dungeons all alone. Walk tells him that one day he will get killed. Will falls to the ground and apologizes, but asks if he will get credit for it. Walk sighs and awards him 2 credits for his troubles. While Will is busy celebrating, Walk asks if he has still not given up on the dream of becoming a Vander. Walk explains that to even have a small chance of becoming a Vander, Will needs to get admitted to the Upper Institute, which requires many credits in writing, spell work, and fighting. Since Will cannot use any spells, he will never get credits for spell work, so no matter how many credits he gets in the other 2, he will never qualify. Will claims that no matter what, he's going to try. Walk tells him that first, he must graduate, but as far as he knows, Will needs 4 more credits by the end of the week. This shocks Will, who immediately starts searching for monsters that can give him 4 credits. Walk tells him that there is a monster called Baskerville on the 6th floor that hasn't been defeated yet. Will immediately hugs his teacher, but unbeknownst to them, Cheyenne overhears this and decides to head to the dungeons himself to kill the monster before Will, hoping Will will get kicked out of the academy for not having enough credits. Later that evening, Will enters the cave alongside his familiar Kiki and tells her to use her nose to find the monster. Kiki is hesitant, as she was burned by a monster's breath the last time Will fought a basilisk. On the other side, Cheyenne and his cronies also enter the 6th floor, determined to find the beast before Will. One of his underlings with pink hair asks if it's a good idea for just 3 mages to enter the 6th floor, but Cyan angrily claims that he is one of the best mages in the class and can deal with it. He gets mad at his underlings and tells them to use their scan magic to find the location of the beast. Suddenly, a huge monster appears and punches the yellow-haired boy so hard that he gets stuck to the wall. Cyan is beyond shocked, unable to move, while the pink-haired boy screams in terror. Will overhears the scream and immediately runs with lightning speed toward the noise, worried about someone getting hurt. He turns a corner and spots Cyan on the floor, shooting fire blasts at the monster, which seems unbothered. Will immediately recognizes the monster as a sentinel, an extremely strong creature worth 10 credit scores, but wonders what it's doing on this level. He realizes that Cyan's magic is ineffective as the monster ignores the flame blasts and moves toward the terrified boy. Will thinks about helping Cyan, but remembers all the times Cyan bullied and ridiculed him. This makes him want to shut his eyes and pretend he never saw it. However, he remembers Elfie, who told him he was the kindest person she knew and gifted him a pair of glasses. This reminds him of who he truly is. He puts on the glasses, and as the monster raises his weapon to finish off Cyan, he blocks the attack just in time and forces it away, saving Cyan's life. Back at the academy, Edward enters Walk's room and tells him to send his familiar into the dungeons immediately, as Cyan and his gang went inside the 6th floor without permission. Walk realizes what has happened but tells Edward not to worry, as Will is also on the same floor. Back in the dungeon, Will clashes with the monster repeatedly, blocking its attacks and outmaneuvering it. He deals a swift slash to its arm, slicing off a finger. The monster angrily tries to attack, but Will dodges and moves through the air like an eagle. The monster finally catches Will, but he manages to block the blow with his sword. He gets blasted back, after which the monster throws rocks at him, which he effortlessly slashes through. He jumps around the monster, lands on its back, and stabs it right through the neck. The monster starts flailing, while Cyan is beyond shocked to see Will's capabilities. Back at the academy, Edward is also shocked, while Walk explains that Will is an outcast with no magic but superhuman strength. Walk describes Will as hardy as a dwarf, with a brain capable of learning any attack pattern from a single glance. They watch as Will manages to slash off the monster's arm and then calmly walks toward the giant sword on the ground. Will picks up the giant sword effortlessly. Walk tells Edward that in a world filled with magic and wizards, Will is the only warrior. The monster shoots an energy beam from its mouth, but Will blocks it with the giant sword and slashes the monster into pieces, leaving it unmoving on the ground. Will then walks over and offers Cyan his hand, was still shocked. Edward can't believe his eyes and screams at Walk that a person without magic can never surpass a magician, storming out of the room. Walk realizes that Edward is in denial and knows that Will's story will become legendary as he turns the world upside down, making Wisteria the only place in the world where a wand and a sword meet. 5 years ago, Will was the laughingstock of the entire school due to his lack of magic. Apparently, the only reason he was allowed to enroll was because he was friends with Elfaria. However, since she had already become a Mage Evander at the time, there was no reason for the school to continue pretending to be nice to him. Will has had to endure all the mockery this entire time, but it hasn't stopped him from working hard to graduate regardless. Wertner accompanied Will to be evaluated by the headmistress, who obviously had her doubts about whether Will was suited for this school. But once she hands him the staff and begins the test, Will is able to counter each and every one of her fire spells within a fraction of a second. She's so impressed that she says Will is allowed to stay at the school. Wertner is a bit surprised since he didn't think it would be this easy to convince her. It is true that Will doesn't have any magic, but more importantly, she thinks it'll be fun to have someone like Will around. Will asks the headmistress if he can be by Elfaria's side again if he becomes strong enough, and she tells him that he will have to work very hard and remain unfazed by the challenges along the way, but even then, there's no guarantee. However, as Will leaves, she remarks that it'll be fun to see what Will can accomplish. Back to the present, Will is currently in Wertner's class as he teaches everyone about the Tower of Magic. Climbing the tower means advancing to the upper institute, to the topmost floor, where you will become a Mage Evander. As of now, there are currently 2 methods to becoming a Mage Evander, either creating a new type of magic or earning over 7,000 credits in this school. However, it is pretty rare to invent new magic, so students usually focus on earning credits. However, given that this is a remedial class, everyone here is at risk of failing out of school, particularly Will. After the classes conclude, Colette meets up with Will and inquires about how he's feeling since Wertner's remedial classes are notoriously stringent. Will agrees that Wertner is a demanding teacher, but admits that he's grateful Wertner is considerate enough to provide remedial classes in the first place, as most professors wouldn't bother. As they round a corner, they notice some commotion and listen in, hearing Cyan's friends praising him for defeating the evil sentinel. They don't question how he survived, but by the time he awoke, all he saw was Cyan and a defeated evil sentinel, implying that Cyan had to have defeated it. Everyone thinks Cyan is incredible for being able to kill a monster as formidable as an evil sentinel. But deep down, Cyan knows he's a fraud since Will was the one who actually defeated it. Just then, he notices Will walking by and takes it as a personal insult, so he goes to Will and starts picking a fight with him again. However, it's much harder for him to view Will as inferior, knowing that Will could easily defeat him right now. Cyan releases Will's jacket and walks away without saying a word. Once Cyan is gone, Coletta asks Will if something happened between them, and indeed something did. Meanwhile, Edward has just barged into Headmistress Cauldron's office, demanding that Will be expelled immediately. Cauldron asks why Edward suddenly wants Will expelled out of nowhere, especially since he's already in his 6th and final year at the academy. They can't just expel him without a reason. Everyone argues that Will shouldn't be allowed to stay at this school since he is a warrior, not a mage, and they won't tolerate someone who can't use magic trying to surpass it. Cauldron pulls out Will's records and points out that Will has exceptional scores in his writing and his magic reports are incredibly insightful. So aside from the fact that he can't use magic, he is the epitome of a perfect student. If his dream were to become a Mage Evander, he could easily excel at any other profession he chose, and it is the Academy's duty to produce learned individuals for the fated day. However, Edward states that the fact Will wants to become a Mage Evander is the problem, and Cauldron can see Edward's points. She proposes a solution. She tells Edward to go and personally test Will, and if Will cannot pass Edward's test, then he's free to expel him if he wants. Edward asks if Cauldron is sure she wants to leave Will's test up to his #1 hater, and Cauldron says she's fine with it since it won't make a difference. If anything, she thinks it will be more entertaining to have the one known as the Dark Viper Mage test him. Back on Will's end, he's getting ready for his next class and asks Colette to help him open his locker for him. She happily does so, and he apologizes for having her do this for him all the time since he can't use magic. She says she doesn't mind, but then she notices Will's sword in his locker and asks him if he's still training with it. Will states that he is, but he couldn't obtain permission to use it while attending school. Later, he and Colette head to the library to study together, and Will is taking it very earnestly despite having already mastered this subject before. Colette tells him to relax since he's already at the top of the class in writing, but Will insists he needs to keep studying diligently as he can't afford to lose a single credit. Besides, he enjoys learning history from the viewpoints of the other races, especially since he can relate to the dwarves who march to war against powerful mages but never give up despite the challenges. Just then, Colette notices that Will has a white strand of hair on his head and says it's probably because he is overworking himself. She offers to pluck it out for Will. And even though Will says she doesn't need to, she still really wants to do it. However, in the midst of their flirting, Edward appears behind Will and tells him to come to the spell hall alone because there is something he needs to do. A little while later, Will arrives at the spell hall, and Edward says that he will be offering Will a special remedial class, so he should be grateful for it. Will can't believe Edward would offer him a remedial class, but that still shows he has no good intentions. Edward wants to see what Will can really do, so he fires a warning shot to let Will know this is serious and tells him that if he's able to successfully land a blow, then Edward will award him 5 spell work credits. Otherwise, if he fails, he will immediately be expelled. It also informs Will that he is not permitted to refuse this challenge either, so he starts casting a spell to incapacitate Will. Meanwhile, Werkner has just been summoned to Cauldron's office where she apologizes for summoning him on such short notice but feels Werkner should be made aware of Edward's actions. She casts a spell to show him the test Edward is administering to Will and strictly prohibits Werkner from interfering for any reason. She believes it's only fair that Edward's request is granted since Werkner's was when he asked to oversee Will. Still, Werkner thinks it is too harsh to let Edward be the one to test Will because he is a man who merely became a Mage Evander. Although he failed, he still possesses power equivalent to one, putting Will in serious danger. So far, Will has managed to avoid getting hit by Edward's spells, but Edward has only been using low-level black magic, and Will can't believe the amount of power Edward is generating. Will has to fight back somehow, so he tries to rush behind Edward and land a kick, but Edward effortlessly blocks it with a shield spell. The shield is too strong for Will to break unarmed, and Edward mocks him for thinking he could penetrate a magical barrier with a kick. Edward then blasts him away, and Will starts to worry that he might not be able to win since Edward is simply too strong for him to defeat as he is now. Edward tells Will that he will limit himself to 2 spells, one to attack with fire and one to defend against Will's crude attempts. However, even if it is only a single offensive spell, someone who masters that one spell can surpass a person who has learned 1,000. Edward is simultaneously casting his fire spell, and Will knows it will be disastrous for him if he gets hit. Nonetheless, Edward still manages to blast him, and it's clear that Edward is relishing this because he appears to be conducting a symphony of Will's screams. Will eventually collapses to the ground, realizing there's no way for him to defeat Edward like this. But if he had his sword, he could at least hold his own against Edward. Outside the spell hall, Colette had been putting her belongings away in her locker and was very worried about Will since Edward asking Will to come alone for remedial classes couldn't have been a good sign. Suddenly, Kiki came rushing into the room covered in Will's blood, trying to retrieve Will's sword from his locker. Colette realizes that something terrible has happened to Will and opens his locker so they can bring in his sword. As Will lies on the ground, Edward slowly approaches him, saying that Will could never hope to become a mage Evander. He can't surpass him here. Magic has always reigned supreme, even in the past when dwarves went to war with the mages. Against an army of 10,000 dwarves, all it took was one mage to obliterate them all. The sword is never going to compare to the wand, but even if the odds are insurmountable, Will still wants to become a mage Evander and will do whatever it takes to achieve it. Edward can't fathom why Will would go to such extremes to become one, so he asks if Will has a noble objective he aims to achieve. Will reveals that he wants to be by the side of the girl he loves. Edward thinks that's a foolish reason. It may seem absurd to Edward, but Will made a promise to Elpharia and is determined to watch the sunset with her no matter what it takes. Just then, Colette arrives at the spell hall and tosses Will's sword to him. Now that he's armed, Will can counter Edward's fire spell. Edward is astonished that Will was able to cut through the spell, but he realizes it's because Will's sword is special. Nevertheless, he still intends to prove that Will is no match for a mage. Will is terrified of Edward's flames and would have fled this fight a long time ago, but confronting Edward is the only way for Will to move forward. So he charges at Edward, dodging all his attacks, and finally, close enough, he slices through Edward's barrier, successfully scratching Edward's cheek. Edward is forced to admit that Will has passed the test, so he awards him his 5 credits and walks away. Will collapses to the ground from exhaustion and Colette runs up to congratulate him on his victory, but he has completely passed out. Cauldron praises Will's performance, and Werkner says his strategy of diving into the attack to close the distance and strike from a blind spot was brilliant. What's even more impressive is that his sword strike was powerful enough to surpass Edward's shield, so Will may have what it takes to become a mage Evander after all. Will dreams about the day Elpharia called him the kindest and bravest person she knew before giving him special glasses as her farewell gift. That was the day she had to go to the tower forever because she was already a mage Evander. As she walked away, Will shouted her name, promising that he would reach the tower no matter what. He swore they would see the sunset together, just like they had promised as children. Tears filled Elpharia's eyes when she heard this, and she turned around, wiping her tears, and told Will she would be waiting for him. Then Elpharia climbed the tower stairs, leaving Will alone, heartbroken. Professor Werkner tried to comfort him, but it made Will cry even more. He promised his professor that it would be the last time he cried like that. Back in the present, Will was working early in the morning delivering newspapers in the city. After finishing his route, an old and bulky man named Donnan greets him and encourages him to do his best. Will then hurries up a flight of stairs but trips, sending all the newspapers flying out of his bag. With his lightning-fast reflexes and nimble arms, he grabs all the newspapers in an instant. Unfortunately, one newspaper slips away, and as Will picks it up, he reads a news article about Elpharia, who has just created a new type of magic. She has earned the distinction of being the first mage in history to create 12 types of magic. Will is once again determined to work hard to stand by her side. As he reads further, he discovers that the Upper Institute has issued an order to the Academy students, and the client of the order is none other than Elpharia. Will freaks out on learning this and immediately runs to his dorm, where he asks his roommate Rosti to make a magic device for him. Rosti asks why he is so excited, and Will tells him about Elpharia's order and that he plans to take part in it. As he changes into his uniform, he explains that the order is to procure the cores of monsters called Frostwalkers found on the 4th floor of the dungeon. Elpharia apparently needs them as catalysts, and every student who helps will be rewarded. Seeing Will so enthusiastic and straightforward, Rosti starts laughing. He was already working on the magic item that we will use occasionally. He gives it to Will, who thanks him and starts to leave. Will soon reaches the 4th floor of the dungeon, but it's crowded with dozens of students hunting Frostwalkers for their cores. Just as Will is about to join the action, a huge explosion shakes him. It was Cian's attack, which obliterated a bunch of Frostwalkers at once. While his followers flatter him, Cian is not satisfied. He thinks about the fight between Will and the giant monster, which fuels his anger and motivates him to get stronger. Unaware of this, Will thinks Cian is cool. He realizes there's nothing left for him to hunt here, so he heads deeper into the 4th floor and comes face to face with giant penguin monsters. The monsters are hostile, so Will immediately draws his sword, puts on his special glasses, and lunges at them. With a few clean strikes, he easily slashes the penguin monsters, saving the nerdy girl who was about to be killed. The girl is amazed by what she just saw. Will defeats the monsters using a sword, not magic, which is beyond her comprehension. Will approaches the girl, who thanks him for saving her life and introduces herself as Iris, a fourth-year student at the academy. Meanwhile, Worker is giving a talk about the importance of creating new spells, saying that inventing a spell is enough to make a mage famous. He explains that new spells are named after their creators, and if anyone in the class invents a new spell, it will be remembered forever. The students whisper among themselves, doubting this approach since only the top 0.1% can achieve such a feat. Then a student named Rose asks Worker if Elfaria, who has created 12 new spells, is truly talented. Worker confirms, calling Elfaria one of the greatest mages in their world's history. He mentions that Will's childhood friend is special, and Rose teases Colette, suggesting Elfaria might steal Will from her. Colette gets flustered and is scolded by Worker. Back in the dungeon, Will is walking with Iris, who has heard about the 6th-year student known as the Talentless Bookworm. Will feels hurt but asks if she despises someone like him. Iris wonders aloud how she could ever look down on her savior. She explains that even though Will doesn't have magic, she respects him for his unique talents. Will, embarrassed, changes the subject to the order given by Elfaria. Iris agrees, saying she wants to help the Magiavander who support the sky. Her words make Will think about how no one in their world has seen the true sky. The immense magic power of the 5 Magiavander creates a false sky that protects their world from invaders. This barrier is essential because, according to legend, if the fake sky falls, darkness and chaos will take over. The students follow orders not just to please the Magiavander, but also to prevent the sky from falling. Will is brought back to the present when Iris mentions that she has met Elfaria before. She recounts a story of being trapped in a dungeon, surrounded by dangerous monsters, and just as she was about to give up hope, all the monsters suddenly froze. Iris turned around and saw Elfaria shining in the sunlight, looking like a goddess. Elfaria gently helped her up, and since then, Iris always stayed with her. While Iris was talking, Kiki caught Will's attention and led him to an interesting spot on the ground. Iris asked him what he was doing, and Will showed her a large ice fragment left behind by frost walkers as they moved. This fragment was really big, so Will was sure a powerful frost walker was nearby. He started walking towards a cave ahead, and Iris asked how he knew since she couldn't find any trace of them with her search magic. Will explained that while magic is useful, it isn't perfect, especially in the dungeon. He also had knowledge and experience. Iris didn't fully understand the importance of these things, but Will stayed alert because he knew what was coming. A giant frost walker had been hiding on the ceiling and suddenly attacked Iris. Will anticipated this and quickly moved her to safety as the monster hit the ground. He then jumped away, and Iris recognized the giant ice monster with many eyes as a Frost Rex, the most evolved form of a frost walker. The monster roared loudly, and Iris remembered that a Frost Rex was a very dangerous creature worth 6 credits. Meanwhile, the monster prepares an ice beam and fires it forward, but Will jumps out of the way. The path is soon filled with sharp ice spikes. Will leaves Iris in a safe place and goes to fight the monster, but she stops him, saying physical attacks won't work on a Frost Rex. Its power is so strong that it can freeze even the tough dwarves with a single touch. However, Will puts on a magic tool made by Rusty and tells Iris not to worry because he has defeated the monster many times before. He charges toward the Frost Rex, avoiding its ice beam by jumping. Will lands behind the Frost Rex and quickly slides underneath it. The monster, unable to find Will, starts shooting the ice beam wildly, forcing Iris and Kiki to run away. Will then circles the monster while it is distracted and throws the magic tool, which hooks onto the monster's side. He slides under the monster again and tightens a strong rope around it, causing its skin to crack. The enraged creature continues to attack wildly. When he finally prepares his final strike, he stands before the monster as it unleashes a cold breath that starts to freeze his skin. The Frost Rex is vulnerable to fire and explosions, which is exactly what he plans to use. He creates friction on the magic tool in his hand, sending a quick flame down the rope to the powerful bomb. The bomb explodes, shattering the monster into pieces. As the smoke and steam clear, he recoils the magic tool Roasted made for him and goes to collect the ice core of the fallen monster. Iris had been watching all this, and upon seeing Will defeat the monster without magic, her expression changes. It turns out she wasn't the native girl she pretended to be, but an agent for someone higher up. She realizes that the supposedly talentless Will is stronger than she had heard and wonders how to report this to her superiors. However, when Will tells Iris that they should head back, she pretends and goes with him. Later, Iris arrives at the White Tower and goes to the top room where 4 of the 5 Magiavanders sit on their thrones. They are searching for talented people to help prepare their world for a disaster. Iris works for them and reports that she found great potential in a boy without magic named Will. She recommends bringing him to the tower. 2 of the Magiavanders strongly oppose this, but Ziu, the white-haired one, is interested and Elfaria just smiles. Ziu is open to anyone skilled joining him, even a dwarf, but the elf girl Alf disagrees because elves think dwarves are uncivilized. The redhead, Carriot, stops the argument and says they don't need to decide now. They can wait to see Will's performance at the upcoming Grand Festival. Everyone agrees and leaves except for Elfaria. Iris was sent after Will by Elfaria, and she takes out the giant ice crystal he sent her, repeating her promise to wait forever for Will. As part of the upcoming exam, the students must engage in combat with golems. If a student manages to defeat one, they pass. Cheyenne and Colette go first, effortlessly overcoming their golems. Meanwhile, Will struggles against him. He attempts to outmaneuver the golem, trying to land a clean punch from behind. As the other students watch him prepare to strike with his fists, they mock him for his inability to use magic, distracting Will long enough for the golem to backhand him across the room. Satisfied with Will's failure, most of the students begin to leave. However, a few other students, including Lehana and Wignall, have no difficulty with their golems and pass without any trouble. Another student, Julius, steps forward and starts casting ice magic. With a wave of his wand, he encases all the golems in solid blocks of ice. Julius is one of the Academy's top 3 students. Lehana praises Wignall and Julius for maintaining their efforts and not slacking off, especially since the banquet is approaching. Julius then declares a friendly competition, vowing to use his newly mastered ultimate technique to defeat them when the time comes. As a gesture of his sincerity, he offers them an ice rose. While neither Wignall nor Lehana seem particularly amused, Wignall looks forward to the challenge against Julius. These 3 are basically celebrities at school because they are the only students who have earned more than 10,000 of the total 12,000 credits. Some view credits as a measure of a mage's skill, but Will is far from that level right now. He doesn't even have enough credits to graduate, and this is his final year. As Will sits and wonders what to do, Julius and his friends approach him and start mocking his lack of magical ability. Will steps aside to avoid trouble. As they leave, he overhears them talking about the Grand Magic Festival, realizing he hadn't noticed it was that time of year. Later during lunch, Colette tells Will that his only hope of becoming a Magiavander is to get noticed at the Magic Festival. Trying to graduate just through practice and writing isn't feasible. There have been cases of students getting scouted without having the 7,000 credits needed to graduate. The Magic Festival, a major event held every 2 years, features various activities and attracts top mages from the tower who scout for promising talents. The festival is where different magic factions compete to recruit the best students, and it's fair to say that admissions to the Upper Institute are decided there. The 5 factions are the Thunder faction, the Elf faction, the Fire faction, the Ice faction, and Mysterious Noah. All the factions, except the Mysterious Noah, are led by their respective Magiavanders. If they scout you, it's a guaranteed promotion. Well, doubts he'll be chosen since he's already failing. To get noticed, he needs some incredible magic that would outshine the high mages. Though if he's right about that, there are still other ways to get scouted. Colette has heard rumors that Watchers come looking for talented students, but Will thinks Watchers are just an urban legend. He believes there's no way a talentless person like him could have a place in the festival, so he plans to stay behind the scenes and help with preparations instead. Colette thinks Will could change how people see him if he entered the festival and showed what he can do. However, Will doesn't want to participate, fearing it would turn into an athletic contest. He once entered the festival in his 2nd year and was booed off stage for using physical attacks, which humiliated him, and he hasn't gotten over it. Students all over the school have begun practicing earnestly for the festival, and Colette reminds Will that aside from the high mages, many scouts from the capital will also be there. Even if he can't become a Magiavander, he could still be scouted for another career. The Magic Festival is a great place to showcase abilities, so Colette really wants Will to demonstrate his capability, but Will still doesn't think it's a good idea to participate without being able to use magic. Colette notices something unusual and approaches another locker to tell Will that something seems off. She senses a hidden barrier there. Bill asks if it might just be a locker spell, but Colette insists it's designed to block sound and sight. She could break it with her magic, but that could be tricky, so she asks Kiki to do it instead. Once the barrier is gone, they discover a staircase hidden behind the lockers, leading to a secret gambling ring where students bet on the outcome of the Magic Festival. Colette is appalled that the locker room has been turned into an illegal betting spot. Then Will spots Cheyenne, who doesn't seem like the type to gamble. Cheyenne defensively yells at Will to mind his own business, but Colette intervenes, warning Cheyenne not to start a fight. Cheyenne calms down and Will ask him again why he's there since he isn't betting. Cheyenne refuses to explain, though it's clear he came to check if people were betting on him. He's upset that no one believes he has a chance to win, even though he's the 4th best student in school. Sure, the top 3 have slightly better scores, but Cheyenne's score is in the high 9,000s. He only ranks lower because he once failed a writing test. Since then, he has been working harder to make up for Phil's lost credits and catch up. His magical skills are still on par with Lehana and the others, so he has just as much chance of winning at the festival as they do. He wonders why he's trying to explain himself to Will. After that, the rest of the day goes on normally. Once classes are over, Will gets ready to leave, but Colette catches his attention and asks if he's free after school to hang out or even explore the dungeon together. Unfortunately, Will has work tonight, so he can't spend time with her. Later that night, Will is working as a waiter at Jenna's restaurant on the outskirts of the city. He brings food and drinks to Donnan, who feels bad for how hard Will has to work. Will delivers newspapers in the morning, attends classes during the day, and then works here at night. It's tough, but he has to manage because he doesn't qualify for the school scholarship and has to pay for everything himself. Danon mentions the upcoming Grand Magic Festival and suggests Will participate, but Will quickly refuses, not wanting to be embarrassed again. Jenna yells for Will to get back to work, pointing out that his friend Rosti is working harder than him. Rosti, who is also working as a waiter tonight, is only helping out as a favor to Will since the restaurant is very busy and one of Jenna's workers quit, leaving extra work that would otherwise fall on Will's shoulders if she doesn't hire someone. After the dinner rush, Will and Rosti are washing dishes. Rosti asks Will if he's truly okay working here since the pay from the dwarves is quite low. He suggests that Will could ask Worker to help him find a better-paying job. However, Will doesn't want to trouble Worker and enjoys the company of the honest, caring, and warm-hearted people here, making his job fun and fulfilling. Suddenly, their peaceful evening is disrupted when Julius enters the restaurant to cause trouble. He immediately starts insulting the restaurant and the dwarves. Spotting Will, Julius mocks him, claiming that someone like Will belongs with barbarians like the dwarves. Danon gets angry, but the other dwarves hold him back, knowing they can't afford to fight a mage. Julius taunts Danon, reminding him that the dwarves are refugees who escaped their destroyed world, and that humans have been generous in letting them live here. He insists that Danon has no right to look at him defiantly. Danon calms down, recognizing that Julius's comments about their refugee status are true. Despite elves also being refugees, dwarves are scorned by humans, and any retaliation against Julius would bring severe consequences for all dwarves in the city. Will can't tolerate such unfairness. He decides that today will be his last day working here. Since he's quitting, Will feels free to do whatever he wants without Gina facing any consequences. The first thing he does is confront Julius, demanding he retract his insult about the dwarves. Will points out that dwarves are hardworking and resilient, thriving despite harsh conditions, and Julius has no right to call them barbarians. Julius, however, doesn't care about the dwarves or their struggles. He kicks his plate of food at Will, and his two goons stand up ready to fight. They fail to realize that throwing food at Will counts as assault, making anything Will does next self-defense. Will grabs the two boys by their shirts and slams them to the floor. In a scuffle, Julius gets slashed and feels humiliated, vowing to make Will pay. The room begins to freeze as Julius draws his wand and attacks Will with ice. Will dodges the strikes but without his sword, and in a confined space eventually gets trapped by ice and pinned to the wall. As Julius approaches, ready to freeze him solid, Will remains fearless. Instead of freezing him there, Julius decides to humiliate Will at the Magic Festival in front of everyone. Will agrees to fight Julius at the festival. Julius threatens to have Will expelled if he loses, but Will only wants Julius to apologize to the dwarves when he wins. Later, the announcement system at Urbis Regarden School urged students to focus and prepare for the year's most anticipated event. After repeating the founder Mercedes' famous phrase, the headmistress kicked off the Grand Magic Festival with the fireworks display. Raj Holland, a scout from the Fire faction, instructed his team to search for talented students. Meanwhile, Lena dominated the sky race, impressing spectators and likely taking home the trophy. The headmistress noted that the scouts in the audience were keenly observing, and Iris Churchill mentioned that this was their only attended event, so they were making the most of it. Lehanna, after setting a new record, defended her fortress on her winged beast in her second consecutive victory. Iris then excused herself to complete a task and attend to personal matters. Elsewhere, Cyan's friends encouraged him to excel in the race to impress a girl. Later, Colette invited Cyan to join her team, making him believe she needed him to win. However, when he entered the waiting room, he found her with Will and immediately confronted them. Colette then explained the situation. They needed a total of 21,000 credits, so Will could only join by inviting the redhead. Cyan was furious about helping the boy against his will until Julius Reinberg appeared behind him in the corridor, chilling everyone with a malicious grin. Cyan was also enraged that Will had once again ignored his warnings, forcing him to swallow his pride for the second time. Meanwhile, Mike Myers, the event presenter, officially began the Magic Festival, introducing commentator Edward Serfants, the school's most hated and cunning teacher. After some harsh remarks, Mike nervously asked why he had to narrate alongside this heartless viper. Shaken, Mike announced the main event, the race for the crown, calling the Elven faction to the field. The elves united to cast the enchantment Magnatura's Ringle, which created various zones, volcanic, swampy, rocky, grassy, and forested, around the stadium. Unlike other events, this competition was team-based, with groups of 3 starting at the outer edges and racing to the central stadium to capture the crown. The first team to do so would win. In addition to natural obstacles, elite teachers set traps along the way. According to the narrator, teams could take the shortest path and hinder others, while Edward noted that the challenges were meant to train students for dungeon expeditions. Mike noted that among the talented students, Team 12, led by Wignall Linder, and Team 9, led by Julius Reinberg, were the most popular. Mike bet all his money on the elf, causing a nearby teacher to question his reasoning. Ignoring the commentary, the determined narrator announced that the least popular team was Team 6, where potential winner Cyan partnered with the talentless Will Surfort. As usual, students mocked Will while Roasty lamented his friend's situation. After the initial presentation, the students took their positions in the rocky zone. Worker tried to dissuade Will from participating, but Will was determined despite being the laughingstock of the magic school. Realizing it was pointless to change his mind, the teacher gave up. All participants were now committed, and there was no turning back. Mike Myers announced the start of the race. Early on, Julius's team encountered steel blocks that transformed into an army of giant golems, blocking their path. Meanwhile, Will set off with his team amid the students' mockery. Flit Malto recalled that during practical class, Will couldn't even scratch a golem. However, with Colette's help, Will now had a spell called Gauntlet, which granted him a powerful gauntlet capable of making a tremendous impact on the golems. Will's force was so immense that the magical visor showing his team was overwhelmed by powerful electrical discharges, blinding the audience. The entire crowd was stunned, except for Worker, who had feared this would happen. Amid the bluish flames from the golem's destruction, Will demonstrated his strength without breaking the tournament rules since his gauntlet was magical, unlike his sword. Despite being mocked as the school's laughingstock, Will managed to stay ahead, while Cheyenne's mind was flooded with humiliating memories. Cheyenne thought death would be better than being saved by someone like Will. To everyone's surprise, Team 6 was leading the competition with the most unlikely trio. As more obstacles arose, Will used his strength to create a barrier from the rocky terrain and his speed to dodge the stones. Colette combined her blood seal bracelet with the Earth's soul wand to empower their teammate. Will then cleared the stage's obstacles, destroying the blocks with conjured swords and finally defeating the last metallic opponent. Cheyenne, puzzled by how this is even possible, remains deep in thought about Will. The display of skill is so extraordinary that the once judgmental students who used to laugh now surrender to the seemingly magicless contender. Even the scouts from the Fire faction are impressed by Will's trap detection and combat abilities. Edward notes that these are the moves of someone seasoned in dungeon crawling, attributing the competitor's near-flawless journey to this experience. Iris Churchill openly supports Will, drawing attention as the only voice in his favor within the crowd. Meanwhile, the other teams, aware of the achievements of the previously underestimated group, rush to catch up but are hindered by obstacles and traps, allowing Will, Colette, and Cheyenne to maintain their lead. Julius, effortlessly clearing the path with his freezing ability, is warned by his teammates that Will is closing in on the crown, but the Ice Mage remains unconcerned. Team 6 has just reached the next stage, the Enchanted Forest. As a powerful chain of circles forms in the air, putting the group on high alert, Will quickly uses his swordsmanship to nullify the spells, redirecting them to attack each other instead of his teammates. Once again showcasing his skill and cleverness, Mike asks the commentator for his opinion, but Edward, frustrated by his least favorite student's success, simply clicks his tongue. Even though Will has achieved remarkable results, he knows that as the stages advance, the path narrows, heightening the likelihood of clashing with other teams. According to his forecast, things get intense when they reach the forest, where the challenges become more daunting. Being in the lead, they have the advantage of the terrain to set a trap for the second-place team, which is exactly what he plans as the next move because Julius is surely approaching with great speed. However, reality strikes when Will decides to pursue this strategy. An ice spear suddenly appears, piercing through the forest and hitting the swordsman directly, but only his cloak is torn, leaving him unscathed. Now faced with Julius, there is no assurance that the Magus will emerge unharmed from this confrontation, especially against his most formidable opponent thus far. Moreover, the boy was alone in the forest, which could imply his teammates are hidden nearby. With no time for idle conversation, Julius summons a barrage of ice spears that materialize in the air and launch towards his adversary. Similarly, Will now has no time to lament over past mistakes because his rival stands before him and the onslaught is overwhelming. A single misstep could cost him the entire competition. Therefore, the only choice is to confront the Ice Mage head-on. Speaking of which, Cheyenne, who can perfectly counter Julius's specialty, starts to get serious. Cheyenne, with all this fury reflected in the flames emanating from his body, melts the ice created by his opponent in a preview of what's to come. However, the moment Cheyenne begins to chant his spell, a powerful layer of flames forms around him. Colette realizes that even Will could be harmed by the growing danger, so she urges him to escape immediately. As Cheyenne activates his E-Flame Berdelian power in his wand, he unleashes a huge wave of fire at Will. Colette quickly raises a protective wall of earth to shield Will from the attack. The explosion's impact is so intense that it can be seen miles away, sending the event commentator into a frenzy. As the dust settles, Will walks through the charred remains of the forest until Cheyenne reappears in the midst of the destruction. Seeing Cheyenne target both their enemy and their ally, Colette angrily demands an explanation. Cheyenne admits he has been biding his time, but now he wants to reclaim his role as the competition's main contender. He challenges Will to a fight right then and there. Will is confused by Cheyenne's sudden hostility, but Cheyenne attacks without warning. Colette tries to intervene, but Julius creates an ice wall around the fighters and also attacks Colette. Will can't see what happens to her because Cheyenne is relentlessly pursuing him. Realizing that Cheyenne's pride has overtaken any sense of teamwork, Will draws his sword, ready to face Cheyenne. Long ago, when Will and Cyan first began their time at the academy, Will was the most pitiful boy one could find. He was often bullied, with others sticking notes on his back that labeled him as worthless. Cyan was disgusted by this and decided to help the unfortunate boy in his own way. He burned the note and then told Will that he could become his subordinate, promising that Will wouldn't have to feel lonely and useless anymore. However, Will simply ignored him and walked away, which infuriated Cyan. Cyan still followed him, shaking him and demanding an answer. With lifeless, expressionless eyes, Will told him to let go, and Cyan had no choice but to comply as Will walked off, wounding Cyan's pride. From that moment, Cyan began to hate him. Now he relentlessly attacks Will with magic spells that set the forest ablaze. Will runs and hides behind trees, but Cyan's spells track him, forcing him out into the open. Cyan strikes with a fire whip, and as Will tries to fend it off, another whip sneaks up from behind and ensnares his leg. Just as he cuts the whip to free himself, Cyan launches another powerful spell, which Will barely manages to block, though the sword is now glowing red hot. Cyan curses at him, asking if he intends only to dodge to survive rather than fight back. Will refuses, saying they are teammates and he has no time to battle him because he's focused on the competition. Cyan, in response, vows to burn him to ashes and resumes his assault as Will desperately evades each attack. He ponders whether he truly has to confront his teammate now, as everyone in the stadium is left in shock at the sight. Edward grins and remarks that regardless of the circumstances, infighting among teammates is the worst possible action in this competition. He believes that because of this, the scouts from the tower will view Will and Cyan unfavorably, and it appears he's taking pleasure in. Until now, the scouts had seen potential in Cyan, but witnessing this incident, they deem him unfit for recruitment. Will's roommate, Rosti, is also worried about him when suddenly Iris arrives and asks if she can sit beside him. They are familiar with each other from past encounters, and Rosti is surprised when Iris starts cheering for Will. She confesses that she wasn't interested in him at first, even though someone trustworthy had mentioned him to her. However, after witnessing his actions, she's become his biggest supporter. Meanwhile, Colette is fleeing from Julius while searching for a way to reach Will and Cyan. Julius taunts her, asking if the renowned Earth Princess is not going to retaliate. Colette despises that nickname and demands that Julius stop calling her that. He attacks her with ice magic, which she counters with a stone wall. However, she suddenly notices a magic circle beneath her feet and realizes she has fallen into a trap. A massive surge of dark magic hits her at point-blank range, leaving everyone in disbelief. Even more astonishing is that Julius appears on every screen, facing all the teams simultaneously. No one can comprehend what is happening as Julius seems to be everywhere at once. He approaches Wignall's team, reminding them of his promise to crush everyone with his secret weapon. Wignall greets him with a well-known spell, returning the ice flower he had once gifted him. As the flower distracts Julius, a magic circle appears at his feet, and he is suddenly swept up in a whirlwind. It turns out that it was merely a clone Julius had created using ice and magic stones, which was then destroyed by Wignall's attack. Everyone is impressed by his performance, but Phildis, one of the leaders of the elf faction, considers Wignall to be utterly ordinary, barely meeting their expectations. She then asks her partner Lefia if she can return to their base, as she is an introvert and finds the festival's atmosphere to be slow and excruciatingly painful. Lefia refuses, insisting that they must stay to watch the entire festival and then report back to their master, the elf Mangiavander. Meanwhile, the audience wonders who will win the competition now. They initially believed that Will's team would triumph, but Cyan went ahead and sabotaged it. His classmates are puzzled as to why Cyan did this, and even Will is questioning why the redhead is so fixated on him. He recalls the time when everyone used to bully him and disrupt his work for no reason other than to make fun of him. He was deeply depressed, knowing better than anyone that he was a failure, but that was no excuse for others to go out of their way to torment him. Numbed by the constant harassment, he only wanted to be left alone. So when Cyan approached him that day, he merely asked to be left in peace. He didn't understand Cyan's intentions, but he didn't care about them either, as he was determined to devote all of his time and effort to reaching Elfaria. On that day, when he ignored Cyan, he unleashed a fireball at him out of sheer frustration. Today, once again, he strikes at him in a similar manner. Will evades the attacks and begins to flee. Cyan then chants a powerful spell, summoning a flaming falcon as his guardian. Will is startled by the sight of it and even more astonished when Cyan orders the falcon to attack him, as guardians are typically used for defense and buying time. Reacting swiftly, Will leaps into the air using his sword as a stepping stone, slicing through the falcon's wing in the process. He then grabs his sword and charges towards Cyan, believing this to be his opportunity to end the fight. However, the flaming falcon swiftly regenerates its damaged wing and resumes its pursuit. Will realizes that to stop it, he must destroy its core, but this proves difficult as the guardian launches fire at him. He dodges the flames only to be attacked by Cyan from another direction. Will uses his enchanted gauntlet to block the attack, but is forced back. Now exhausted, he notices that Cyan also appears fatigued. Everyone, including Edward, is stunned by Cheyenne's performance, as commanding a guardian with such precision indicates he is far beyond the level of a typical student. Even the scouts from the Fire faction are intrigued by him despite his betrayal of his team. According to their records, Cheyenne was weaker than the top 3 in this group, but his display today astonished everyone. A scout leader suspects there must be a reason behind his sudden surge in power and decides to inform the Flame Magus Vander about it immediately. Back in the battleground, Will is on his knees, realizing that Cheyenne has significantly grown stronger. Cheyenne questions if that's all Will has, remarking that he was far stronger when he battled the giant monster. Will inquires why Cheyenne is doing all this, pointing out that they have no reason to fight. Cheyenne snaps, asking how Will can say that after everything that has transpired between them. He questions if Will truly has no anger or hatred left after being bullied for so many years. Will admits that he is angry and does hate him, but insists that their priority now is defeating Julius. Hearing Julius's name drives Cheyenne to the brink, and he curses Will for focusing on everything else except him. Cheyenne demands that Will stop ignoring him. At that moment, Will realizes the reason behind Cheyenne's strange behavior. Cheyenne has acknowledged him and now seeks acknowledgement in return. Will dons his action glasses, takes his stance, and resolves to respect Cheyenne's feelings by giving the fight his all. Cheyenne is pleased that Will is taking him seriously and begins chanting his most powerful spell while the Flame Falcon surrounds him. Will knows he can't succeed with a half-ass attack, so he carefully watches the timing of Cheyenne's spell, preparing for a counterattack. Suddenly, Cannon commands his guardian to strike, unleashing dozens of fireballs simultaneously. Will is momentarily stunned by the scale of the assault, but has already anticipated the trajectory of the attacks. He charges forward at full speed, effortlessly dodging the fireballs, emerging from the flames to slash the Flame Falcon's core before advancing towards Cheyenne. Cheyenne launches another close-range attack, but before their attacks can connect, a stone wall rises between them, halting the battle. Will bangs his head against the wall and even tumbles to the ground as Colette arrives and demands they stop fighting. Her clothes are torn after her battle with Julius, and she proudly tells the boys that she kicked Julius' butt. Cheyenne is slow to respond, but he gets flustered and scolds Colette, saying it's inappropriate for her to walk around in such clothing. Colette calls him a misogynistic pig for judging a woman based on her appearance and reminds him that the whole mess is his fault for starting the fight. She then tells Will to hurry ahead because he has unfinished business with Julius while she handles things here. Cheyenne insists that he won't let her interfere with his fight, but Colette snaps at him for being selfish and foolish. Suddenly, Will drapes his cloak over her and thanks her, causing her to blush with embarrassment. Will grabs his sword and rushes off, telling Cheyenne they'll settle their fight another time. Meanwhile, Julius and his team are the first to enter the stadium. The host thinks there's no one who can stop them from claiming the throne when suddenly, Will bursts into the stadium at lightning speed. He lands with a thud right behind Julius and his team, leaving everyone stunned. Will locks eyes with Julius and challenges him to a fight, which Julius had been eagerly anticipating. The scene shifts to Elfaria relaxing in her tower room when Sarissa bursts in. Sarissa quickly notices Elfaria dozing off and wakes her with a smack, scolding her for always napping or daydreaming. Irritated, Elfaria asks what she wants. Sarissa hands her a stack of papers, urging her to review the recommended candidates, highlighting Julius as an excellent fit for the Ice faction and a potential successor. Elfaria considers Sarissa's suggestion. The scene then moves to Will preparing to face Julius in the games. Julius, smug as glad, Will showed up on time, admitting it wouldn't have been satisfying to win by default. Will, determined, vows not to lose until Julius apologizes to Donnan and the others. Julius sneers at Will, dismissing him as all talk and no action, calling him a rat. He then flaunts his ice magic, creating a thick mist that fills the arena. Will, on high alert, tries to sense the others through the fog, suspecting they're trying to surround him. Suddenly, an ice spell hits him from behind, but he narrowly dodges it. Realizing he can't stay still, he moves, dodging 2 more ice attacks. Believing he's located Julius, Will strikes, but is blindsided by another ice attack. Julius then reveals with a smug grin that neither he nor his team has moved. Will realizes he's been tracking clones, not the real Julius, shocking everyone as 5 versions of Julius stand before them. Will briefly wonders if it's an illusion, but quickly realizes it's not. Julius explains that his clones can explode and the one closest to Will detonates, trapping him in a block of ice. Even Edward is stunned, recognizing the spell as one of Elfaria's legendary creations. Worker explains that Laria's brilliance lies in the 12 unique spells she created, each one a masterpiece. Julius is using one of these spells, which Will instantly recognizes as one that creates living sculptures, perfect replicas of the caster. Shocked, Will demands to know how Julius could wield the same magic as Elfaria. Julius arrogantly laughs, claiming it's all due to his immense talent. He boasts about mastering the spell on his own, saying it's just the first in the series, but he's already on par with Magia Vander. Sneering, he dismisses Elfaria as insignificant and declares that one day he'll take everything from her. Will's anger surges and he breaks free from the ice imprisoning him, charging straight at Julius. Julius and his clones respond by hurling ice boulders, but Will easily cuts through them. As Julius continues casting spells, he boasts about controlling his clones and having them cast spells independently. Julius's teammates confidently predict Will's defeat if he stays put. Julius then stops his direct attacks, using his clones as anchors to trap Will in a magical barrier. Will desperately slashes at the barrier, but it holds firm, leaving him trapped. With a smug expression, Julius explains that it's easy to hunt a wild animal in a rampage, then hurls a massive ice boulder at Will, declaring that this will end the fight. The crowd is shocked by the display of power as Mike announces Julius's victory without him even moving. Even Edward is impressed, stating that this level of control is the ideal for all mages, finally understanding why Julius has over 10,000 credits. Julius then grabs his wand like a microphone and tells the scouts he mastered Elfaria's spell on his own. Boldly, he declares himself Elfaria's successor, leaving the students amazed. They murmur that no one can beat him if he can wield Magievander's magic, but Iris sees through it. She points out that Julius cleverly used Will's strength and agility to make himself look good, acknowledging his cunning. Rosti adds that Julius will look foolish if he loses now. Against all odds, Will shatters the ice boulder, leaving Julius speechless. Will casually thanks Julius for the spell, saying it helped him cool down. But Julius, irritated by his chatter, declares he's going to defeat Will for good. Julius and his clones launch another attack, but Will deftly dodges their spells and swiftly takes out Julius' teammates. Edward, recognizing the tactic, realizes it's the same technique Will used against him. The crowd erupts in excitement as Julius' ice clones begin to crumble. Will calmly explains that Julius relied on his friends to control the clones, which is why he could wield Elfaria's spell for even a short time, adding that Julius is nowhere near Elfaria's level. Back at the tower, Elfaria observes from a distance and ponders whether Julius could be her successor if the reports are true. However, she quietly reflects that she prefers a sword by her side rather than a successor. Will then mentions that Julius' Ars Weiss isn't as impressive as it seems. Unlike autonomous guardians, Ars Weiss is fully controlled by the caster, and without his teammates, Julius wouldn't have managed to control the clones. Enraged by Will's criticism, Julius, who sees Will as talentless because he can't use magic, retaliates by launching roses at him. Will easily slices through them, but Julius makes the roses explode. Will shields himself from the blast, while Julius quickly summons 4 more clones to attack from all sides. Will dodges or counters every strike. Julius admits he isn't skilled enough to control 4 clones without his team and knows the spell will soon exhaust him, but he's confident Will won't identify the real one. Laughing at Will's assumed helplessness, Julius is surprised when Will charges at him. Panicking, Julius creates an ice wall, but Will shatters it with his sword, sending a shard of ice into Julius. Stunned, Julius demands to know how Will identified him. Will calmly explains that Ars Weiss clones have body temperatures around -36 to -37 degrees Celsius, the exact opposite of the casters. If a caster loses control of their clones, the cold seeps from them like frost forming under Frostwalker's feet. Realizing Will is correct, Julius watches in disbelief as his clones crumble to pieces. Confusion and anger boil within him. How could someone like Will know more about this spell? Will, with a touch of nostalgia, reveals that Elfaria, his childhood friend, is the reason. He shares that they both grew up in the same orphanage, and because of this, he knows her magic thoroughly, though he's never reached her level. Elfaria calls down from the tower, reassuring Will that their memories and his efforts won't be in vain. Will, facing Julius, calmly declares that he knows the strengths and weaknesses of Elfaria's magic. Furious, Julius declares he won't let a talentless person like Will mock Magievander's magic. He attacks with an ice spell, but Will effortlessly cuts through it. Sarcastically, Will praises Julius, noting how remarkable it is that no other mage has replicated Elfaria's magic. Then Will drops the bombshell. Ars Weiss, the spell Julius is proud of, was created by Elfaria at age 2. This revelation strikes Julius hard, but Will continues, saying the spell is imperfect and easily countered, making Julius nothing more than the proverbial naked king. Julius can't believe he was once proud of mastering a spell created by a 2-year-old. The realization that he's no better than a child humiliates him, filling him with rage. In his fury, he summons 8 clones and warns Will not to underestimate him, boasting that he can do much more. Determined to overwhelm Will, Julius launches a barrage of ice spells, but Will remains unfazed. He casually mentions that, as a kid, he was bullied by 10 of Elfaria's clones, making Julius's efforts seem trivial. Enraged, Julius attacks, but Will effortlessly dodges each spell and takes down 1 clone. Desperate, Julius commands his remaining clones to stop Will so he can escape, but it's futile. Will methodically destroys every clone, blocking or dodging their attacks with ease. With the clones defeated, Will strides toward Julius and lands a powerful punch, knocking out one of his teeth and leaving him unconscious on the ground. Everyone is stunned. Mike announces Will's victory, amazed that someone with no talent defeated a foe with over 10,000 credits. Rosti is speechless, and even Lehana begins to see Will in a new light. As Colette and Cyan arrive, Mike declares that all Will needs to do now is claim the crown. Just as Will reaches for it, Wignoll swoops in, grabs it, and places it on his head. The crowd is stunned, and Mike reluctantly declares Wignoll the winner, marking the end of the Grand Magic Games. Sarissa then informs Elfaria, who is so ashamed she can't show her face. She wishes for a spell to erase memories or turn back time, but Sarissa mentions that such a spell might exist, though she wouldn't let Elfaria use it. With tears in her eyes, Elfaria insists she wasn't trying to bully Will. She just wanted them to be together so they could play all the time. She's horrified that the students now know about her dark past. Meanwhile, Cyan is shocked that Will defeated Julius and vows to defeat Will someday. Colette checks on Will, who apologizes for their loss, but is relieved he kept his promise. Will didn't win the competition, but the real success was watching Julius suffer a humiliating defeat. To celebrate, Will and his friends head to a bar for dinner. Later, Donnan asks if Will was scouted by the tower. Colette answers that he wasn't, which was expected since his team had issues, and he didn't actually win. She blames Cyan, saying Will could have won if not for Cyan's outburst. Rosti asks where Cyan is, and Will says he invited him, but Cyan wasn't interested. Donnan reassures Will that it doesn't matter if he wasn't scouted. Beating Julius and making him apologize was enough. Julius, meanwhile, is stuck washing dishes as part of his apology to the dwarves, a task he hates but must do because of his loss to Will. Everyone but Julius is enjoying the celebration. Colette then notices Worker looking worried and asks why. Worker says he's concerned about how Will will be treated now that his abilities are known. Colette thought people would respect Will more, but Worker warns it's not that simple. The next day at school, students are getting ready for the all-student practice event, a week of dungeon diving. Many are nervous and haven't picked their groups. As Will walks with Colette, some classmates nervously ask if he'll join their team for the dungeon raid, impressed by his strength. Before he can answer, more students crowd around, all wanting him on their team. Colette realizes this is what Worker meant. Now everyone suddenly wants to be friends with Will, which she finds hypocritical. She steps in, scolding the students for trying to befriend him after bullying him. She assumes Will is angry too, but he's just happy that people finally like him. One girl tells Colette to let Will decide who to team up with. As she tries to convince Will to join her group, Colette impulsively smacks the girl's hand away and claims she already has plans to go shopping with Will tomorrow. Later that night, Colette cringes, realizing she accidentally asked Will out on a date. Her roommate teases her about it. Colette shouts that she didn't intend for it to be a date. Rose doesn't argue, but he suggests she should at least get ready since she's still going shopping with Will. Colette agrees, saying she should make an effort so as not to be rude to Will. Meanwhile, in Will's room, he's studying a bit when Rosti asks about his plans for the next day. With no classes scheduled, Rosti wonders if Will will go to the dungeon again. Will tells him he actually has a shopping trip planned with Colette. She convinced him to come along since he needed to get supplies for the upcoming practice event. Will doesn't think much of it, but Rosti is clearly jealous. The next day, Colette waits nervously in the city square for Will. Even though she asked him out by accident, she's determined to turn this into a real date. Will soon arrives and compliments her on her new dress and hairstyle, making Colette blush. Before they can set off, Rosti shows up unexpectedly. Colette is confused, so Will explains that Rosti insisted on coming along for the shopping trip. Rosti says it will be more fun with him, but it's clear he doesn't want Will alone with Colette. He grabs Will's hand to start the shopping trip, leaving Colette wondering about the nature of their relationship. Rosti seems like he's trying to keep Will away from her, but it's still not gay because they are wearing socks throughout the entire day. Whenever Colette tries to spend time with Will, Rosti always interrupts, making it impossible for her to get even a moment alone with him. Eventually, she asks Will what's going on with his relationship with Rosti, as the two seem far too close to be just roommates. She jokingly suggests that Rosti might secretly be a girl since he has such a pretty face. Will laughs this off, explaining that it's not possible. They take baths together, and Rosti has more length and girth than Will does. Sure, Rosti is a bit touchy-feely, but he always says no homo, so Will assumes he's just being friendly. Rosti returns with 2 drinks, offering one each to Colette and Will, but none for himself. When Will asks about this, Rosti says he'll just share Will's drink instead. Annoyed by Rosti's behavior, Colette offers her drink to him, which irritates Rosti. He tells Will to go ahead and finish his errands without them. Will hesitates, but eventually leaves. As soon as he's gone, Colette confronts Rosti directly, asking if he's really just Will's roommate, as he seems far too affectionate. Rosti stands close to Colette, asserting that he loves Will more than anyone and won't let her come between them. Colette argues that she and Will were once close, even hugging all the time until a few years ago, though she's embarrassed to admit it now. Rosti dismisses this, pointing out that he bathes with Will every night, claiming he is far more intimate with Will than she could ever be. The two continue to argue over who has more right to spend time with Will. Will is heading to the blacksmith shop in alleyway when he hears someone call his name. Turning around, he sees Lehana, the top student, standing behind him. Will is surprised. He never expected someone so renowned to have any business with him. When he asks what she needs, Lehana replies that she has something to discuss and asks him to follow her. After a short walk, they arrive at a room where Julius, Wignall, and Cheyenne are waiting. Lehanna explains that with the final term approaching and the all-student practice exam coming up, she wants the 5 of them to form a team. Cheyenne and Julius are shocked that Lehanna wants to include Will. Will is equally confused, especially since Cheyenne and Julius are known to dislike him. Tensions rise as Cheyenne threatens Will, but Wignall uses illusion magic to calm everyone down. He reminds them to hear Lehanna out before acting rashly. Once calm, Lehanna explains that she wants to form a team of the Academy's best students, including those who stood out at the festival. She believes Will has unique skills that would complement the team. However, Julius disagrees, arguing that Will, who lacks search abilities, would only be a hindrance. Even though Will had beaten Julius badly, that didn't mean he wouldn't be a valuable addition to the team. Cheyenne also didn't want Will to join, but his reason was simply that he disliked him. Wignall thought it was petty for them to reject Will over personal grudges. Will had already proven he could defeat both Cheyenne and Julius, so why did they feel entitled to look down on him? Will had incredible strength and agility, and while his techniques might not be refined, he still managed to outperform their strongest magic. Julius mocked Wignall for acting superior when he was only second in credits, but Wignall didn't mind. He respected Lehanna's opinion, who was first in credits. If she believed Will was skilled enough to join their team, Wignall would respect him, though he still had no respect for Julius or Cheyenne. Lehanna then spoke up, stating her goal was to use this team to reach the top of the tower and secure a better future. Will couldn't understand why she needed to go through all this when her performance at the festival should have been enough to get her noticed by the tower. Lehanna admitted that the Thunder faction had already offered her a post-graduation spot, but that wasn't enough for her. Since many mages in her family had died young, she wanted to aim higher and become a Mangiavander to avoid the same fate. She believed everyone in the group had the same ambition, so she invited those who wanted to join to place a coin in the goblet as a sign of commitment. Wignall is the first to accept Lehanna's proposal, as no team could perform better. Julius agrees, hoping to earn more credits, and Cheyenne does too. The only one undecided is Will. Late into the evening, he returns to Rosti and Colette, who have been worried since they didn't know where he was. Will doesn't explain, but says he's decided to join Lehanna's team for the all-student practice. In class, Worker briefs the students that floors 7 through 10, previously off-limits, will now be accessible, allowing them to earn more credits. This event is a great opportunity to gain over 1,000 credits, but it's also dangerous. Last year, 4 students were killed by monsters. Professors are stationed to ensure safety, but risks remain. Lehanna's team enters the dungeon and Colette, despite not being invited, tags along, insisting she must stay with Will. Rosti wanted to join but had to stay at base camp as an artificer. He did, however, prepare many magic items for Will. With that, the all-student practice exam begins. They all spring into action while Will thinks about impressing Elfaria if he performs well in this session. Before he can grasp the plan, Wignall blasts them into the air with wind magic, speeding across the landscape. But soon they begin to fall, terrifying Will as he wonders what's going on. Luckily, they stop just before hitting the ground, landing softly, except for Will, who faceplants into the dirt. Colette asks if he's okay, and Will quickly gets up, trying to adapt to his new group. Suddenly, the cave behind them explodes and a massive crimson ant emerges. Will assumes it's just one monster, not a big deal, but then they realize it's an ant colony and a swarm starts heading their way. Knowing mages struggle in close combat, Will prepares to fight, but Wignall stops him, urging him to observe. Lehanna rushes past like lightning, and Wignall explains she comes from a knight family, excelling in close combat despite being a mage. She showcases her skill of destroying the monsters with ease, leaving Will stunned. As they move forward, things don't go as Will planned. He recalls Workner mentioning basic magic spells like Search to find monsters, but since Will can't use it, he struggles to locate enemies. When another monster sneaks up behind him, Julius freezes the ant and warns Will to stay out of the way, making him realize he can't even defeat a single creature. Wignall soon uses a massive wind blade magic circle to wipe out all the monsters around them. Wignall remarks that he expected Will to be more helpful, but so far he's been pretty useless and hasn't even fulfilled his role as the shield. Lehanna steps in, arguing that Will just hasn't had the time or chance to settle into his role, and she believes they'll soon be glad he's with them deeper in the dungeon. They don't bother collecting loot as it would only slow them down, while Cheyenne warns Wignall not to hold them back. Will tries to shake it off and contribute, but he's still no help as the monsters are killed before he even gets a chance to properly see them. He simply follows them around the dungeon like a pack mule while they handle all the enemies. Eventually, Lehanna checks her watch and tells the group that it's already been a day, so they should take a short break before continuing. Since they're in the middle of a cave, which isn't exactly safe, Wignall uses his elven magic to create the illusion of a firewall that won't harm anyone but is enough to scare away any approaching monsters. Lehanna then asks him to hand out the rations they brought, so Will quickly drops his pack, pulls out food for each team member, and distributes it. When he approaches Wignall, the green-haired elf tells him to stay back and leave the food on the ground, saying he doesn't want to touch Will because he's not worthy. Call is outraged by this discrimination and, like a typical white woman, starts yelling at Wignall. He claims it's not just what he avoids, he doesn't want to be touched by any of the others except Lehana, as they're all mages and he's an elf. He only allows Lehana because he considers her worthy. Will tells Colette to let it go while sitting and reflecting on how fortunate the elves are, much like the dwarves. Though not originally from this world, elves are highly skilled in magic and respected by humans. Even at the top of all magia, the elven queen reigns supreme. Soon, Lehana calls everyone for a meeting, announcing they're headed to the 10th floor where a boss monster awaits. She says killing the creature will earn them 110 credits, an impressive sum. Since there's only one boss, they need to ensure they get the kill. She admits she formed this group specifically to defeat the boss and catch the attention of upper-level institutes and scouts. Wignall, however, questions whether they should go straight for the main challenge without tackling smaller enemies first. Lehana retorts, calling his mom an appetizer, and insists they face the boss at full strength, dealing with minor monsters afterward. She asks if anyone has concerns about taking the fastest route to the 10th floor. Will knows the boss will be dangerous but needs the credits, so he agrees. When they enter the 10th floor, they're shocked to find a pile of dead monsters already there. Will wonders if someone arrived ahead of them, but Cheyenne insists it's impossible because they took the quickest path and even skipped all the base camps. Will crouches to inspect the dead monster on the ground and notices it was killed by brute strength rather than magic, which seems highly suspicious. Despite this, they continue to venture deeper, and suddenly, they're all stunned to discover that the boss has also been defeated. A three-headed dog lying lifeless on the floor. This sight alarms the mages, who immediately start using search spells. Will remembers Workner warning him that search magic has weaknesses, as a mage can use cloaking magic to hide, and that there is a dangerous monster capable of doing the same. Will's heart races as he looks up and sees glowing red eyes. The monster is preparing a beam and fires it at them. Will shouts for everyone to step back as he blocks the beam with his sword, deflecting it. Before they can process what's happening, the monster appears behind Wignall and slams him into a wall, causing him to bleed. The remaining mages quickly begin preparing spells, but the monster slams his hand on the ground, shaking the entire foundation. The ground beneath them cracks, and they all begin to fall. Will immediately dives toward the unconscious Wignall and saves him mid-fall. As they land, Will gets up and realizes they're in a strange new area on an entirely different level. Cheyenne and Julius are also stuck together, and they can't believe they've fallen down to the 11th floor, which is outside the Academy's territory, meaning they can't expect any rescue. Lehana's hand is bleeding from her head as she wonders if they'll ever make it out alive. The 11th floor is unlike the others, restricted to high-ranking mages. Her fears are confirmed when a massive snake attacks Will, but he manages to slice its head off. This snaps Wignall out of his daze, amazed that Will defeated the beast alone. Will tries to help him up, but Wignall angrily pushes his hand away, insisting he can manage. Wrapping his arm in bandages, Will estimates they've lost nearly all their gear, with supplies to last 2 days at most. But being on the 11th floor, they likely have only 1 day to escape. Will urges Wignall to find Colette and the others, the only way they'll survive. Wignall argues they should wait for help, following Academy rules, but Will reminds him that no help is coming, especially with a monster on the 10th floor. He's proven right. 2 Academy professors have been killed and crucified, while monsters rampage on the 8th floor. Professor Eliza struggles to control the chaos, and Workner senses something is seriously wrong. Edward rushes in, announcing the event is cancelled and they're heading in. Meanwhile, on the 11th floor, Wignall continues using search magic, but Will tells him to relax before he tires himself out. Will tells the elf to let him and Kiki search for nearby monsters, while the elf should focus on those farther away. He advises them to keep fighting to a minimum, which surprises Wignall, as few can stay so calm in such a situation. However, Will has faced many dungeons before and knows them well. Suddenly, they sense 3 pig-like monsters trying to surround them. Will decides to handle the 2 in front, leaving Wignall to deal with the one behind. The elf uses wind magic to blast his opponent back, but is shocked to see Will effortlessly slicing through the monsters. Will moves with incredible speed, dodging attacks while landing lethal strikes. Just as Wignall thinks his monster is defeated, it charges again. With no time to counter, he attempts illusion magic, but Will yells at him to stop. The monster easily ignores the illusion and nearly kills Wignall, but Will intervenes, cutting it in half. Still stunned, Wignall hears Will explain that these pig monsters have no eyes, so illusions don't work on them. This realization leaves Wignall defeated as he laments his constant failures, while Will wonders where he'll find a therapist for this idiot. Among all the elves who have entered the Academy, Wignall is the only one still here after 6 years. The others have already ascended the tower, but before they left, they scorned Wignall as a disgrace to elfkind. The reason lies in his illusion magic. While most elves create illusions that take physical form, Wignall's remain intangible, mere illusions. Will can't grasp why Wignall is seen as a failure since he's among the top 3 students, but the fact he hasn't ascended means he's simply the best of those left behind. Lehana shares this view, believing true talent inevitably leads to ascension. Over the years, she's watched gifted individuals surpass her, realizing her title of #1 at the academy is meaningless in the larger world. Wignall learned this hard truth early from his milk sibling Eleanor. Raised together, he adored her, hoping to stay by her side forever. But during a practice session, Eleanor, holding a wand for the first time, displayed extraordinary magical talent. This marked her as a potential elf queen, and she was taken away, leaving Wignall behind. He pushed himself to the limit, honing his magic to catch up to her, but despite his efforts, he always lagged behind his peers. This made him resent other mages like Will out of insecurity. Wignall expected Will to mock him after sharing his story, but instead Will smiled, finding a shared struggle between them. Wignall told Will not to bother comforting him, convinced he was just a burden and better off left behind. But Will stood firm, assuring Wignall he wouldn't abandon him, confident that he was a remarkable elf worth protecting. Moments later, they were battling fierce monsters all above level 5, yet Will dispatched them with ease. Afterward, he checked on Wignall, who couldn't fathom why Will risked himself for him. Will simply replied that he believed in him. Suddenly, Will sensed something behind them. Wignall scanned the area but found nothing, realizing the sound came from the dungeon itself, birthing a new monster. Wignall and Will stay alert, but suddenly, a rift opens above them, releasing a stream of green liquid as creatures begin to emerge. Will immediately recognizes them and attempts to annihilate them with a blast before they can attack. These creatures, known as Balkar, are infamous for being incredibly hard to defeat. They are immune to physical damage and have strong resistance to magic. The only thing that can harm them is elven illusion magic, and with no escape route, Will pleads with Wignall to help him in the fight. Wignall panics, confessing that he can't do it. He knows his illusion magic is flawed, and no matter how hard he tries, he's bound to mess it up. However, Will reassures him that it's okay to make mistakes. They happen, and they can't control that. Neither of them are perfect, but if they're too afraid to fail, they'll never move forward. Wignall tries to warn Will that if the illusion spell goes wrong, Will could end up dead, but Will insists he won't let himself die. He has a goal, to reach the tower and reunite with Elfaria, and until that happens, dying isn't an option. Wignall is left speechless, realizing that despite both he and Will being viewed as inferior, Will has never allowed it to hold him back. He admires that determination. As the Balkar launch their attack, Will charges forward to distract them, but his sword proves ineffective. Wignall understands he has to act now. He lifts his wand, preparing to cast his spell, hoping this time it will work. To his dismay, Wignall's magic fails to work on the Balkar, and he fears Will might die because of his failure. As the Balkar prepare to strike, Kiki steps in just in time, creating a shield to protect Will. Will urges Wignall to try again, telling him he believes in him. Hearing those words gives Wignall strength, something even his own people never gave him. With renewed determination, Wignall successfully casts an illusion spell, creating a forest that destroys the Balkar. Will is pleased with Wignall's success, but notices him kneeling. Wignall apologizes for his earlier behavior, realizing Will is a true warrior deserving of respect. Will smiles and says he has always respected him too, and they shake hands, solidifying their friendship. Afterward, Will uses a magical map that Roasty created, which reveals the area with a drop of blood. Kiki, still remembering Colette and Cyan's scent, can track them. Meanwhile, Julius and Cyan make their way through the dungeon, but water is scarce, and they must ration it carefully. Cyan tells Julius to just make some ice and drink that, but Julius argues he can't waste his magic. They start bickering. Once they calm down, Julius scans for nearby monsters but finds nothing, so he relaxes. Suddenly, Cyan pulls him into cover. Julius is confused as his scan showed no threats, but Cyan reminds him that some demons can evade detection. Using a heat-sensing spell, Cyan spots an approaching evil sentinel, and not just one, but dozens. Julius suspects this is due to the monster on the 10th floor. Cyan steps forward, determined to fight, and asks Julius to create clones to distract them. Julius tries to warn him they can't win against so many, but Cyan insists, driven by a need to prove himself after a past failure. Meanwhile, at base camp on the 47th floor, evil sentinels are attacking. In the chaos, just before a student is killed, Professor Edward beheads the sentinel and orders a retreat to the 6th floor. Worker then arrives on a sky racer to fly Edward deeper into the dungeon to save more students. Most students hadn't reached the 10th floor before the incident, but one group, Lehana's team, had already made it there and was fighting the floor's boss. Edward is concerned they won't be found in time since the 10th floor is large. However, Worker reassures him that he knows their location because Kiki, who's with Will, has a gemstone linked to his. Meanwhile, Colette is leaving stones behind to mark their path. She asks Lehana how long they've been there, and Lehana says it's been 16 hours since they got stuck on the 11th floor. They're running low on food and water, barely resting due to constant monster attacks. Colette admits that Lehana's skills have kept them alive, but she's nearing her limit. Lehana apologizes for rushing them to the 10th floor, which led to their predicament. Colette tells her it's not her fault, it was the floor's monster. Plus, Colette wasn't even invited, she joined on her own. Confident that Will find her trail, Colette holds out hope. But it isn't Will who finds the tracks. Wignall and Will are running, sensing a nearby mage. As they round a corner, they find Cheyenne standing atop a pile of sentinel corpses. Wignall is stunned, but Julius appears, yelling that Cheyenne didn't do it alone. Julius had to sacrifice many clones for him to succeed. Will is relieved to see them both alive, but Lehana and Colette are missing. When asked, Julius thought the girls were with Will, leaving them worried about what might have happened. Elsewhere, Colette approaches a figure resembling Professor Bruno, but Lehana stops her. It feels off. Suddenly, his head falls off and he writes a greeting. His partner, Mars, scolds him for not handling the situation upstairs and letting kids slip through. Headless explains that Duke must have botched his job, causing a breach. Mars doesn't care, only concerned about eliminating witnesses. Colette accuses them of killing their professors, which Headless proudly confirms, declaring that they want to destroy the false sky. This shocks Colette, as the barrier protects against the Celestial, meaning these villains aim to trigger the calamity foretold in legends. Headless feels he's explained enough and declares that he's going to take the girl's head now, unleashing a slashing spell at them. Fortunately, before they could be beheaded, Will swoops in and blocks the attack. He and the others had managed to track down Colette by following the trail she left behind. Unsure of what's happening, Will charges at Headless to buy the group some time to form a plan. However, Headless blasts him away before he can get close, sending Will flying. Amused, Headless remarks that he'd love to add them all to his collection of heads. But Mars pulls him back, reminding him they still have a mission to complete. Instead, Headless opens a portal, ordering them to surrender the children. Before long, the monster they encountered on the 10th floor teleports in, and this time, there's no escape. The team must face it directly. Soon, the monster they confronted on the 10th floor materializes, and this time there's no escape. The team has to either face it head-on or retreat deeper into the dungeon. After Duke unleashes an energy blast that almost wipes them out, a decision becomes obvious. None of them are prepared to fight this creature right now. Will orders everyone to fall back into the passage behind them, but Wignall stays behind to delay Duke. He starts weaving his illusion magic and summons a massive wall of roots to obstruct Duke's advance. However, it proves utterly useless as Duke easily rips through it with sheer power. Now dangerously close to the monster, Wignall is about to be caught when Will rushes in to pull him out of harm's way just before another energy blast hits, nearly vaporizing them. Coincidentally, the blast causes a cave-in, dropping debris that separates Duke from the group. Safe for the moment, Colette asks what kind of creature that was and why it's so powerful. Will explains that he had once read about it in the Academy's library. It's an evil Grand Duke, a member of the Greater Demon class, typically only found on the 25th floor. So why did one appear here? Lehana suspects it's the work of the sinister mages they encountered earlier, but they have more pressing issues to deal with. Though they temporarily lost Duke, he's surely hunting them down, and he has ordered all the demon-type monsters on this floor to search for them. Their odds of surviving are slim, and Julius is starting to panic, fearing he won't make it out alive. Lehana feels guilty for their dire situation. They're injured, exhausted, stuck in dangerous territory with few supplies, and Julius is understandably panicking. Will then speaks up, urging the group to fight back as it's their only option for survival. The demons control a vast area, making escape nearly impossible unless their leader is defeated, which would leave the demons disorganized and vulnerable. Julius thinks Will's plan is reckless, doubting they can handle the leader alone, but Will insists he has a strategy and won't force anyone to join. Despite Julius' objections, Wignall, Colette, and Cheyenne agree to follow Will's lead, trusting his knowledge of dungeons, though Cheyenne still harbors dislike for him. Lehana, though hesitant, ultimately decides to trust Will after seeing Cheyenne's faith in him. Will takes command, though Julius remains skeptical. Will acknowledges Julius's concerns, which is why he needs Julius's ice magic for the plan to succeed, offering to teach him one of Elfaria's secret techniques. A short time later, Will dashes across the dungeon to lure in the Duke. Once the Duke is close enough, Julius begins casting a spell from the ledge. The Duke instantly fires a blast to kill him, but it only hits a clone. More clones continue casting the spell. This is the trick Will mentioned earlier. If one clone is destroyed mid-cast, another can take over, allowing time for an advanced spell. However, maintaining the clones is difficult for Julius, so he's frustrated with the toughest task. After all the clones are destroyed, Julius rushes out to finish the spell, and Will tells the others to slow the Duke down. Colette, Will, and Cheyenne all attack, but the Duke remains unharmed. Although Will warned them that the Duke's wings were indestructible, they still need to slow it somehow. Will slashes at one of the wings, briefly pushing the Duke down, but he's quickly brushed off. Neither magic nor physical attacks work, but their goal is just to distract the Duke long enough for Julius to complete his spell. Will and the others work together to keep the Duke occupied while Julius prepares his spell. When Julius finally unleashes a massive essical attack, he's drained, but the Duke is only injured. Will expects this, knowing how strong the Duke is, but hopes the damage is enough for Lehana to strike. She swiftly moves in for the kill, but a magical barrier, likely placed by evil mages, blocks her. The delay allows the Duke to counter, and Will rushes to save her. He calls on Kiki for his shield, but his goobles are destroyed, leaving him vulnerable. Meanwhile, Worker and Edward are heading to the 11th floor to rescue the students, shocked the Grand Duke is there. They can only hope the others hold on until they arrive. Will is hit, but Wignall uses magic to save him and Lehana as everyone rushes to check on them. Lehana insists she's fine, but since Will took the worst of the attack, she's more concerned for him. Will looks shaken, mostly due to the destruction of the goggles Alferia gave him. Meanwhile, the Grand Duke is breaking free from the ice trapping Julius, and Cyan suggests preparing for another attack. However, Lehana urges everyone to flee, insisting they take Will and leave while she buys them time. Though Colette tries to stop her, Lehana blames herself for failing to finish off the Duke and feels obligated to make amends. Wignall steps up, saying he'll fight too, as Will is the only other human he respects. Together, they charge at the Duke, with Wignall using magic to restrain it and expose his core. Just as Lehana prepares to strike, the Duke breaks free and hurls her aside. Witnessing their struggle, Cyan is paralyzed by fear, convinced they will die. As he tries to justify fleeing, Will interrupts, visibly panicking. Without his goggles, Will is paralyzed by fear, shaking uncontrollably. He asks Cyan to punch him to snap him out of it. Cyan, furious, lashes out at Will, angry that the person who gave them hope against the Grand Duke is now trembling. He beats on Will, blaming him for everything. Will takes the hits, but eventually regains his composure, thanking Cyan for helping him move again. Cyan is baffled by Will's sudden smile, but Will just grabs his sword and asks Colette to watch Kiki. Cyan doesn't understand how Will overcame his fear so quickly, but Colette explains that Will is still terrified. He's just pushing through it as always. Cyan can't believe it, having never seen Will scared before. As a mage, Cyan fights from a distance, but Will, as a swordsman, must face bigger, stronger foes head-on, which would terrify anyone. Still, Will fears running away or losing loved ones more than the fight itself. Colette decides to join Will, while Cyan struggles with the thought of leaving them as the monster continues its assault. Its defenses are unbreachable, and due to its high mobility, it's difficult to land a precise strike on it. Their best chance to defeat it lies in disabling the Duke's wings. Colette hurls stones at the Duke to distract it, and since Lehana and Wignall are no longer able to fight, it falls to Will and Colette to figure out how to bring it down. As the Duke prepares a volley of attacks, Will readies himself to face it directly. Without Kiki by his side, a single direct hit could be fatal, but having encountered this attack before, he dodges the blasts entirely. When the dust settles, he's already airborne, closing in on the Duke. Colette understands Will's plan and pours all her energy into forging the strongest sword possible for him. Armed with it, Will manages to destroy one of the Duke's wings, leaving it vulnerable. Now all that's left is to land a decisive blow, and fortunately, Cyan arrives just in time to do exactly that. He rides it on his guardian as a distraction while chanting a powerful spell. Once he's close enough, he unleashes the Inferno spell at point-blank range. However, even this isn't enough to finish the Duke. Neither wand nor sword has proven sufficient to defeat it, leaving Will unsure of what to do next. Suddenly, a shard of ice falls from above. It's from Rosti. Will doesn't know Rosti is there, but he hopes this icy intervention will help trigger his memory. We witness a memory of a woman cradling a baby Will, dreaming that one day he would unite the wand and the sword. Suddenly, Will gets an inspiration and rushes for his sword, asking Cyan to cast a spell at him. Without hesitation, Cyan obeys and Will cuts through the magic, absorbing it into his blade. Will feels an overwhelming surge of power course through him, allowing him to effortlessly cleave the Grand Duke in two. Now that the Grand Duke has finally been vanquished, Will collapses to the ground from sheer fatigue, feeling his strength ebbing away as his sword reverts to its normal state. He's uncertain what that mysterious power was or why it resides within him, but with the immediate danger eliminated, he feels assured that everyone is safe. Unfortunately, as he turns around, the group is met with the horrifying screams of the evil sentinels, racing toward them from every direction. The sentinels must have heard of the Grand Duke's death and are seeking vengeance. However, none of the group has the energy left to continue fighting, leaving them utterly defenseless against these monstrous foes. Worker and Edward, seeing the sentinels attacking the group, rush to aid them, but they are too far away to arrive before anyone gets injured. Julius is the first to be targeted, but just before the sentinel can strike, a staff is driven into the ground and dozens of magic circles form around the sentinels. With a single incantation, every one of them is disintegrated. Will recognizes it as a high-tier annihilation spell, but he is baffled as to who could have cast such a potent spell. When he glances up, he is astonished to see a group of men clad in white robes. Moments later, Worker and Edward arrive, equally shocked when the leader of the robed figures pulls back his hood to reveal himself as Aaron Mysterious Oldaking, the king of the Magiavanders and undoubtedly the most powerful among them. But what could he possibly be doing all the way down here? Will glances at the rest of his group, noticing that they appear to be returning from a dungeon raid deep within the lower levels, having just wrapped up a campaign that led them here. Aaron reassures the children, praising their efforts in battle, and they all begin celebrating their survival. However, while the group's attention is on Aaron, Will is more intrigued by a figure in a black cloak who is carrying supplies. The boy seems to have an understanding of Will's true nature, though this is their first formal encounter. He approaches Will and introduces himself as Finn. Meanwhile, in another part of the dungeon, the sinister mages are relieved they chose to leave the children in Duke's care. Despite Duke's failure, they succeeded in retrieving the artifact they sought. Crossing paths with Aaron would have spelled disaster, but now that they have what they came for, the aftermath of the dungeon event is bound to grow more chaotic. In the days following the incident, a few funerals are held to honor the 11 casualties, all professors who fought valiantly to protect the students. The Academy is investigating those responsible for the attack, but no leads have surfaced. Will and the others are recuperating in the infirmary, still puzzled over the identities of the two mages. The only clue they have is that these mages are deviants with enough power to effortlessly kill Academy professors. Aside from that, they know nothing. Colette is still struggling to accept that Bruno and the other professors are truly gone, and she realizes that if Aaron hadn't intervened, they likely all would have perished too. Despite everything, Lehana reminds them that they are still alive. In spite of the circumstances they found themselves in, they managed to get out without losing a single teammate. Lehana proudly declares that they made a great team, and she's profoundly thankful for the opportunity to fight alongside them. Just then, Lehana's stomach starts rumbling, and Colette offers her some of the apples she brought for Will, but Lehana keeps eating and eating until all the apples are gone. Colette is astonished by how much Lehana consumes, but Lehana defends herself, saying that because she fights in close combat alongside her magic, she burns through a lot of energy and needs more food than the average mage to recover. She insists it's not that she enjoys eating, and she doesn't want people thinking she's a glutton, though it's clear she is, so Colette remains skeptical. Returning to the topic, Lehana addresses Will, thanking him for his quick thinking and courage, which allowed them all to escape the dungeon alive. She expresses her gratitude, but Will humbly says it was a team effort and he couldn't have done it alone. At this point, Julius jumps into the conversation, still harboring dislike for Will. He brings up the moment when they nearly all perished because Will froze in fear for a few seconds. Julius is also annoyed that Will's plan cost him so many of his clones. Fed up with the negativity, Colette shoves an apple into Julius's mouth to silence him, disregarding the fact that she might choke him in the process. Cheyenne asks Will about the power he used in the dungeon. Colette had been curious too, as she had never seen Will do anything like that before. It seemed like his sword absorbed Cyan's spell, but it was different from a typical enchantment, so it's unclear if it was even magic. When Julius can finally speak again, he starts yelling at Will for not using that power earlier since it could have prevented the danger, but Kiki interrupts him by scratching his face. No one helps Julius, though Cheyenne agrees with his point and asks Will for an explanation. Will, however, is just as confused. He can't remember much, only that his mind went blank and he suddenly knew what to do. Colette suggests asking Warner and the other professors for insight into Will's power. Will also recalls the boy he met in the dungeon and wonders if anyone knows about him. Wignall realizes Will is referring to a supporter and explains that the boy is likely part of the Finn tribe. Lehana adds that the Finn tribe, though unable to use magic, has vast knowledge of the dungeons and works as guides for powerful mages. Will is eager to learn more about his powers, but he's equally curious about Finn. Meanwhile, Finn has just returned from the dungeon and meets with Cauldron. She's relieved he made it back safely after such a long journey. She asks how far he went, and Finn replies that his party reached the 49th floor, which was incredibly challenging. Getting straight to the point, he shows her a broken sword hilt. Cauldron recognizes it as a weapon reported to belong to a mage slayer, the same group Finn's team encountered on the 40th floor. During the clash, 20 high mages were killed, but they eventually defeated the mage slayers. Finn suspects they weren't naturally created by the dungeon, hinting that their enemies might be conducting experiments. Finn explains that Aaron has ordered him to return to investigate further and asks Cauldron to analyze the sword. Cauldron apologizes for giving him more work, but Finn brushes it off, saying with enemies working in the shadows, he has to do his part. However, he has one more thing to discuss. Why didn't she tell him about Will? They had an arrangement. Wands were her domain, while swords were his, so he wanted an explanation. Cauldron agreed that Will would typically have gone to Finn, but since Will was a student at the Magic Academy with aspirations to become a Magiavander, he was an exception. Finn was surprised, but eventually conceded that Cauldron made the right call in keeping Will given the circumstances. However, this was the first time he heard of a sword trying to become a wand, though Cauldron believed Will might be exactly what they needed in these difficult times. Finn agreed, and after flipping off Cauldron's desk, told her that he'd leave Will in her care but would check in occasionally. The next morning, Will was up early training while the others, still injured and tired, watched in awe. Colette felt envious, while Julius wondered what kind of body Will had to recover so quickly. He joked that Will might be a dwarf, but Wignall defended his friend, telling Julius not to compare him to dwarves. Cheyenne suddenly gets out of bed and walks to the window, shouting at Will to fight him. Will is caught off guard as Cheyenne leaps out the window to face him, wincing from his injuries upon landing. Colette urges Cheyenne not to fight since he's clearly too hurt, but Cheyenne insists he can do whatever Will can. Will tries to explain they can't duel right now, but Cheyenne reminds him of the promise they made at the Grand Magic Festival. Cheyenne demands his duel, claiming that if Will can't beat him while he's injured, he'll never reach the Magic Tower. Realizing Cheyenne is serious, Will grins and raises his sword as Cheyenne starts casting spells. Will runs up the walls, dodging Cheyenne's fireballs, and despite the chaos, both seem to enjoy the fight. The battle continues until Worker spots Will, causing everyone to scatter to avoid trouble. 2 months later, the students are back in class when Worker addresses them. Despite the lingering effects of the practice exam incident, he urges them to move forward. With the school year ending, the first day of their graduation exam has arrived. Will is determined to graduate and reach the Magic Tower to be with Elfaria. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe and check out this video about a lonely boy who finds out his ex-girlfriend is his new stepsister.